My name is George, and I think the title of my talk is something like surviving a stem cell transplant. When I was originally asked what I would like as the title of my talk, I suggested what I did on my sick leave, but apparently that wasn't quite specific enough. But that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. Although, thinking about it, surviving a stem cell transplant isn't actually that precise. It's more surviving through a stem cell transplant. Because I was diagnosed with leukemia back in 2005, and I don't really want to spoil the ending, but I'm still here. So, so it's quite a long story, but I'll try and cram it into the 10 minutes that I have. I am a layout copy editor for Global Production, so I work on ISIS, Flight Global, and Hairdresser's Journal. And so I'll take us back to 2005. I had just finished my undergraduate degree. I was 23, and I think, like many graduates, was ready to take on the world. Wild ambitions to maybe one day become a sub-editor for Hairdresser's Journal. When, a few months after finishing my finals, having started work, I had a few niggles, went and saw the doctor, had a blood test, was told something definitely didn't look right, and before long had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and was rushed to hospital to start treatment as soon as possible. Obviously, when you're 23, the last thing you expect really is to suddenly have to rethink your life, really, and having felt so sort of confident, ready to take on the world, to suddenly be wondering what's going to be happening the next day or the next week. But I went into hospital and started treatment as soon as possible, a combination of steroids, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. And at the same time, a search was started to see whether there might be a match stem cell, potential bone marrow donor. Firstly, looking among my siblings, because there's a good chance that I think it's a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance that a sibling might be a match. This is because one of the possible treatments was going to be to have a bone marrow transplant or stem cell transplant. Now I have 3 siblings, so I thought, this is great. Yeah, I've got a decent chance here. And they were all pretty excited because they thought, wow, we could actually save George's life and he'll owe us forever. So they got checked and were sort of arguing among themselves as to who was going to be the match and who was going to end up giving me some stem cells to potentially save my life. Unfortunately, none of them were a match. Well, none of them was a match. So, which was a bit tricky for me because it's quite hard to ring up your excited siblings and tell them, I know you were really excited about helping me out, but you can't. Fortunately, though, although none of them was a match, they also found out at the same time that we are all siblings. So at least I could lead on that and say, hey, great news, we're definitely siblings. Unfortunately, none of you is a match. However, my treatment was progressing, and there were still other possibilities. One possibility is to have what's called an autologous transplant, which is where you use your own stem cells. You grow them specially, they take them out, make sure they're clean, and use those to replace your bone marrow. The basics of it are that leukemia is a blood cancer, and with a transplant, you wipe out the old bone marrow, which has the traces of leukemia, and replace it with a new, hopefully clean bone marrow, which will create a new immune system, which will hopefully fight any leukemia coming back as well. But at this point, I was carrying on with the chemo and the radiotherapy. which went on for quite a long time. But we got to a point where I was either going to have an autologous transplant using my own stem cells or carry on with longer term chemotherapy. I was on a trial, so it was going to be randomized, and it happened to come up with the autologous transplant. Now, there are two ways that you can give stem cells if you become a donor, and this is quite key if you are interested in joining the stem cell registry, and we have Anthony Nolan here for people who are interested, because there are two ways generally that you can give your stem cells. In each case, you get some small injections of growth factor, so to encourage your bone marrow to grow more stem cells, and then they obviously need to take them out. So unlike other transplants, they're not taking anything away from you. The stem cells are grown specially for this, so you're not losing anything. But the first way and the most common way is, and I think 90% of donations, stem cell donation is done this way, is peripherally. So I had the growth factors, and they tried to take the stem cells peripherally. They put cannula in each arm, take your blood out, spin it around, take the stem cells away, and then put your blood back in. So you're not even losing your blood there. So they did that, but unfortunately didn't manage to get enough stem cells. So I actually also got to experience the second way of collecting stem cells, which is under general anesthetic, so you're knocked out, and they take it from your pelvis directly from the bone. This doesn't happen so often, but I actually quite enjoyed the experience, because waking up, anyone who's had general anesthetic might know, you wake up, just life seems beautiful, it's all very dreamy. So I have very happy memories of this. A little bit sore for a few days afterwards, but that was it. Unfortunately, they didn't get enough stem cells, so I ended up having the longer term chemotherapy. So this, all in all, the treatment that time had taken a couple of years, but it had got me into complete remission, and things were looking good. I was feeling pretty good. I went off and did a master's in journalism, and got on with my life. And in a way, I think when you're 23 out of university, you think, I'm invincible. This is, you don't really consider what might go wrong. And obviously, when I was diagnosed with leukemia, I realized I'm not invincible. However, after this treatment, I was feeling great, and I was thinking, maybe I am invincible after all. This is great. Now, there's a statistical milestone that survival is measured by. So when people talk about survival and what are your chances of surviving and things like that, they generally think about 5 years, because the more time goes after you recover from your leukemia, the less chance there is that the leukemia is going to come back and you're going to relapse. So I was getting on with my life, and got to my 5-year milestone, thought, fantastic, this is really looking good. I wouldn't say I'd forgotten about the leukemia, but it certainly wasn't anywhere near the front of my mind. Unfortunately, 6 months later, in October 2013, I'd been having sort of 6 monthly checks to make sure things were okay, and things were starting to look a bit strange, and it turned out that I had relapsed. So this time, my consultant sat me down and said, you had lots of chemotherapy the first time, and in the end, it hasn't managed to keep the leukemia away. So we're going to need something different, and it's going to be a bone marrow transplant or stem cell transplant, which I kind of knew. And obviously, being diagnosed with a relapse was not quite as surprising as the original diagnosis. But obviously, worrying, particularly because it is more difficult to get into remission. The second time around. But in order to have a transplant, as I said before, none of my siblings was a match. But back in the day, Anthony Nolan had been searching their register, worldwide registers, to see if there was a match for my bone marrow. They had actually found someone, but it had been decided at the time that it wasn't worth a transplant on the balance of risks for me to have a transplant from an unrelated donor. This time around, having relapsed, it was. So Anthony Nolan, the doctors are quickly on the phone to Anthony Nolan again. Here we are. George is going to need a transplant. So Anthony Nolan was searching their registers again. And I was extremely lucky in that there was more than one match. There was the original match that had been found 5-6 years ago, but they also found a couple of others who were also very good matches. And this turned out to be very helpful, particularly because I first had to get into remission, which was a little more complicated than expected. I was given some very intensive chemo, which the doctors were definitely hoping would get me into remission, but it didn't. So we had to look for something different, and I ended up on a trial using antibodies, using chemotherapy with antibodies to particularly target the leukemic cells. And I don't think this time anyone really expected it to get me into complete remission, but we were going to try. And fortunately, come February 2014, I was in complete remission. So this is great because it meant I could go ahead and have the transplant to try and actually keep the leukemia away this time. So my doctors got in touch with the first donor and the youngest donor of the matches that I had on the register, but couldn't get hold of him. So this is why it was really important, really lucky for me that there was more than one potential donor, because they at some point had to give up on trying to get hold of the first one. Got in touch with the second, who was ready and willing and happy to donate his stem cells. So I had my stem cell transplant in March 2014, so not much longer than a year ago. And as mentioned before, I'm here, which is fabulous. It's been a fascinating journey, I'd say. I celebrated my 1-year birthday in March with rather more drinks than I did the year previously. Although I did actually make the day of my transplant a party as well, although then it was sparkling elderflower cordial. But I had a big balloon in hospital and a little hat and so on. And yeah, since my transplant, back in October, I started coming back to work on a staggered return and have built that up. I'm now doing 3 days a week at the moment, and generally enjoying life, because it's certainly given me a different perspective. So in a very strange way, it's I've taken a lot of positives from the experience. And hopefully you can take some positives as well. If you are interested in joining the stem cell register, you could potentially save a life. The process of joining is very easy. The process of giving stem cells, as I've described, is certainly among all the things that I did during my treatment, they were among the very easiest things, was when I was having the stem cells taken from myself. Anthony Nolan's here focuses on 16 to 30-year-olds, but there are other registers you can join. There are also other ways in which you can help Anthony Nolan, because obviously the more people who are on the register, the more chance that people who desperately need a bone marrow transplant to save their lives will find a match. So do please consider it and tell your friends and find out more. If you want to find out any more information, Laura is at the back there. I'm willing to talk as well to anyone, although I always forget some of the key facts, so I might have to turn to Laura there. But that's my story. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the day, and yeah, join the register if you haven't already.